Yeah, 5.
To curtail air pollution in Nigeria, especially in rural communities, would be to include the implementation and upscaling of green projects, with relevant partnerships, for transmission to low carbon energy sources, such as renewable energy, LPG, and energy sufficiency. And we've started the clean cooking stove, which we want to upscale on a broader scale, to improve the impacts, towards responding to pollution, particularly in communities in Nigeria. So we did this through the Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves initiative to effectively change the mindset of the average Nigerian about firewood and introduce them to cleaner options of cooking, with the goal to ensure a safe, affordable, sustainable, clean energy access for all our rural poor. Then I know you were going to ask me about why we have not been able to contain the gas flaring menace in the Niger Delta. I'd like to say that efforts are still ongoing with coordination of relevant stakeholders and key players, to enforce compliance. We also have the Interministerial Committee on Climate Change with line ministries like the Ministry of Power, Petroleum Resources. So this is an ongoing task. The committee will be meeting to move forward on the implementation of the gas flaring issue. Then also we've had collaborations with the Ministry of Power, for us to ensure progress of the low carbon electrification scheme. We have the collaborations that we did through the Green Bond that supports the energy projects. Then we have the GIZ, the National Energy Support Project, and I'm sure Salijo will talk more on this. I would leave off my closing remarks when I hear from everyone else, then the questions that would come. So I will now give you a closing on what the Ministry of Environment is doing to ensure a clean recovery, and for clean recovery, it ties into clean energy. The two are intertwined. Thank you very much. That's a bit I would give for now.
All right, thank you very much, Honorable Minister. You kept to time, we really appreciate that. And some of those questions that you answered in brief, we'll probably unpack them a little more during the course of the conversation, but thank you very much for that excellent kickoff. So we'll now go to the second speaker, Maria Attano. Over to you for your opening remarks, please.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you all. Thank you, Honorable Minister of State, for those great insights. I am a researcher at a think tank that is in Germany, but I have been privileged to be able to live in Nigeria for the last 5 years. It has been fantastic personally and also for my research into Nigerian energy transformation. And I've thought some points on the issue of green recovery from an international perspective, and then would narrow down to what it means for Nigeria. But first of all, I wanted to start by reminding ourselves that there is no economy versus environment conflict. When we look at the mid and long-term consequences of this crisis and how we will overcome it, it's not helpful to now start on a very false dichotomy that this is an issue of jobs versus pollution or of exports versus climate. I think we've got enough of all those simplified narratives, and we should not fall into it. I can talk a little bit about green recovery programs that my institute has been looking into since the financial crisis, because there is already some experience. And after 10 years ago, there were stimulus programs up to $1 trillion in the major economies. And at the time, there was not a huge, there were large elements of what was called green investments within those stimulus packages. But there was different definitions and different amount of political will for it. Some countries like South Korea had an incredible foresight in this area and invested heavily on sustainable energy, on their transport infrastructure that would reduce emissions, and have seen the effects. And their choices of putting a lot of their fiscal stimulus into green investments is credited with them having recovered very quickly from the financial crisis and having had an impact on employment and GDP growth. So because of this and other examples now, in this context of the current pandemic, green recovery is being discussed again very seriously. And just this week in the European Union, there's a 500 billion euro recovery fund up for discussion, still to be negotiated, but it is clear that the conditions for how these funds will be disbursed will be tied to the umbrella policy of the European Commission at the moment, which is the Green Deal. I also wanted to point out there's a pretty famous study right now on from Oxford University, which has evaluated green investments, and there has been, sorry, there was an echo, it's fine. And I quote from this report, it has taken a look at different types of investments with...
Others, if you're not talking, if you can please go on mute. Okay, go ahead.
Right. So for example, particularly for clean energy infrastructure investments, it shows through evidence how it's particularly labor intensive, creates twice as many jobs per dollar as fossil fuel investments. It also contrasts with other possible measures such as bailouts of airlines and car industry, which are currently on the table, and those fare worse in terms of their economic return and of course the environmental impacts. So again, green investments they're showing themselves to be economically effective and can bring about this socially fair outcomes for current workers and future generations of workers. And that's internationally, but what about Nigeria? So in Nigeria, unfortunately, we don't need to look back 10 years for the latest economic crisis. In fact, we know that currently there might not be any significant amount of funds to create a green recovery. There are loans that Nigeria will be is being offered, has accepted, and there are savings, and there are even savings from removing of subsidies. So those are all recent developments in this crisis. But as we know, this is now currently the perfect storm for Nigeria. And you will have seen the figures for prediction for contraction of GDP. And also now there are these World Bank figures estimating that an additional 5 million Nigerians would fall into extreme poverty this year. That's in addition to what was expected already. And that's bleak. I just to add one more bleak detail, I do want to flag up that there is another issue, which is Nigeria's preparedness for the next major crisis, which is the climate crisis, as the Honorable Minister of State has already alluded to. And the climate crisis for Nigeria means a health crisis, means food security crisis, it means also the security crisis in general. And this is not going away because of the current crisis, the current pandemic. The climate is still warming, despite the drop in the last 2 months, in the slight drop in reduction in emissions. 2020 is headed to be the warmest year on record since records began 150 years ago, globally. And this is a crisis that we would not be able to lock ourselves down for. We are not having any kind of social distancing measure. The only vaccine for this is to stop the emissions, and also to invest in our preparedness to face those challenges. So in other words, for Nigeria, that would mean preparing Nigeria's cities, its agriculture and its manufacturing sectors, and even its oil infrastructure to face the effects of climate change in the coming decade. And if I can just finish on a brighter note, I wanted to give a thought on how I see clean recovery for the power sector in Nigeria, because I see Nigeria from the years I was involved in the research about this this country. I must say that there are a lot of progress that has been done, and to me the central focus of any economic recovery at the moment is to maintain this momentum and to not lose ground on the many dimensions that are going on at the moment: on-grid, off-grid, finance, policy, skills, etc. And I hope there will be a chance to discuss it, and I very much look forward to hearing what the other speakers and the audience have to say about it. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you, and I'll look forward to the discussion later.
All right, thank you very much, Maria. So you were, I think, 30 seconds over, but that's okay for today. Ahmad, over to you, MD of REA. I'm not sure if you're on video yet, but even if you're only still on audio, that's fine. If you can now please go ahead with your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Wiba.
There you are. Okay, good to see you.
Yeah, I don't know if you
Ina Hulanka. No, okay, so okay, go ahead.
Thanks for that, Wiba. I can see you're going to be a very accurate timekeeper today. So yes. I'll try to take it within the particular time that was allocated. But before I go into that, I think I just wanted to, pardon me to digress a little. The Honorable Minister, I was very happy to hear some of the things you are mentioning with the green bonds at the Ministry of Environment. I was privileged enough to be there just before you came in with Amina Mohammed. I don't know if you are aware, where I worked with her for 2 years, and we were part of the design of a lot of those programs that you're currently working on. So I'm really, really happy that those are making progress. And this is where I started getting the nexus between the renewable energy and the climate change pandemic that we're currently going through at the moment. So this is where I began to learn how renewable energy could make a really, really big impact. So the Ministry of Environment actually gave me the foundation to start this work at the Rural Electrification Agency. So I just thought to put it out there for you, Honorable Minister, and to continue to commend you for the good work that you're doing at the ministry at the moment. So just before I go into other things, in essence, the Rural Electrification Agency, which I'm sure you're aware, is the agency of government that implements the rural electrification for the underserved and unserved communities in Nigeria. At the moment, as we rightly mentioned, the electricity issues in Nigeria, spans over 80 million Nigerians without having access to power. This is why at the Rural Electrification Agency, we continue to encourage private sector participation, which is what myself and my good friend, Mr. Weber, often have synergy on, where he is part of the private sector while I'm in the public sector, and we ensure that we create that opportunity for private sector investment. We are aware that public sector money is just not going to be enough. Hence why we open the space for private sector to come in, invest, and sell this power to nearby communities at a reasonable tariff. So to that effect, we have a fund of about $550 million from the World Bank and the Africa Development Bank, which funds the Nigerian Electrification Program and other initiatives of the REA for providing access to these underserved and unserved rural communities. And the major activity that we look to stimulate by bringing this sort of money is agriculture. The power we are providing to them through the grid extension projects, mini grid projects, standalone solar systems are providing currently numerous benefits. The electricity allows farmers to practice irrigation to increase food production and incomes, the electricity and the productive appliances. Just last week, 2 days ago, we had a webinar on the productive use appliances, where we had called on various developers and told them about the program with the Africa Development Bank to encourage developers to come in and key into that program, where the productive use appliances could be benefited with mini grids communities that we currently have. So that program has actually currently been rolled out, and we're working on putting it on board for other private sector firms to come in. So that being said, the benefits of this electrification create a growth of agricultural value chain, farmer incomes, jobs, food security, and all other contributors to sustain economic growth and improve balance of payments. With this, with power, what you realize is that we try to look beyond providing that power. We try to look at or measure the impact of how that power has enhanced economic growth, how that power has affected lives. So for us, this is where we know that taking this electricity to the rural areas would encourage them to have these occupations where their life, it were increasing their livelihoods. So in essence, we also look at how this power in this country now, where security is also a problem. We have situations where having power, and especially through some of our programs, improve lighting at night. We have a situation where, for instance, in the energizing education programs that we have, just bringing power to these campuses actually enhances security to ensure that people are being able to go around at night. With the specific, with COVID, what you find is that the healthcare system in Nigeria as well, power, of course, plays a very big role, especially with powering some of these molecular equipment. So just recently, and ourselves and all on the company that Weber runs, we've tried to bring power to the healthcare system. At the REA, we took power to about 4 isolation centers here in Nigeria. one in Abuja, another one in Lagos, and 2 in Ogun State. And what we found is that the absence of clean, reliable energy affected, how equipment are being run, how vaccines are being stored. So this essentially enabled us to contribute a little to what the government is already doing on the COVID-19 situation. So I think I would stop here, and I'm sure Wiba will ask more questions later on that would continue to stimulate the discussion. So thank you very much, and I'm very honored to be here today.
All right, thank you, Ahmad. And again, I think the link with your background in the Ministry of Environment and on the Green Bond.
So over to you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So what I was saying is, I think your background with having been in the Ministry of Environment, working on the Green Bond, and then now in the REA. I mean, as the Honorable Minister said, I mean, that's kind of like the perfect combination of how we can drive the a more green, a cleaner economy, with that kind of collaboration. So I think you're the perfect person for this. But look, let's go back to the Honorable Minister to kind of unpack and sort of go further on some of the questions that we were going to raise. So you mentioned, Honorable Minister, in your remarks that from your view, power is obviously a big driver of emissions in Nigeria, primarily because so much of our power is through diesel and petrol generators that are not at economies of scale. It's house by house, building by building, that kind of thing. However, I guess I would question that, and I just want to say maybe you could go a little further. Wouldn't you say that with the with most people working from home for so long now, office buildings aren't using power, so overall there would be a lot less kind of diesel and petrol generated power being supplied right now. I mean, I would imagine that would actually mean that the emissions have gone down significantly, but it'd be interesting to hear what your view is on this. Has the lockdown and all of this sort of slowdown had a major impact on emissions, or is it not that different? Honorable Minister, you might be on mute. We can't hear you if you're talking.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, there we are. Okay, good. And now you're on video, so we can see you. All right, good, perfect.
Yes.
Okay, so go ahead.
I was saying, yes, due to the power rationing and power shortage in Nigeria, people are still running their generators at home. Because if we had enough clean, renewable energy at homes, it will enhance the COVID-19 social distancing. People will stay home because they have energy. But those who are home now, everyone is running their generator.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so your estimation then, because we're now running the generators 24/7 at home.
People are still running generators, yes. Essential services are still going on.
Yeah, yeah.
So even if there's any reduction, like I said, it's not sustainable, because once the lockdown is over, do we go back to business as usual? Right.
So it's and I guess overall the Nigerian economy, in terms of the population, the overall emissions per capita is actually quite low anyway.
Yes, it's low, but that doesn't mean we should increase it.
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay.
Then also, let me even add something else, which is an outcome from what Salitu was talking about. I'm sure if he hears this, he'll be happy. I mean, we had the Federal Executive Council meeting, and we have a Presidential Economic Sustainable Committee. And the Minister of Finance presented a memo which was approved. And in the Economic Sustainability Plan, it proposes a range of interventions for post-COVID recovery.
Okay.
Yes, and also to spawn local production and job creation. And 5 of the key aspects in it that I picked out were: 1 was a mass agricultural production.
Okay.
Was 1. Number 2 was a major rural road construction program in Nigeria. Then we have a mass housing program. Then the fourth one that Salijo will be very happy about is a large-scale installation of residential solar systems.
Okay.
With the caveat that we will utilize mainly local materials.
Okay.
Then also we have the expansion of the federal government's social investment program. So all these interventions must tie in with green recovery for us to access climate finance. And Maria talked about what Korea had done and the climate financing. We are gearing that way. We were part of the UK Africa Investment Summit, and I had a bilateral with the Secretary of State for Business Development in the UK, Andrea Letsom. And the outcome of that was a climate finance advisor for Nigeria to be able to access green financing. Because as Maria is aware, Nigeria hasn't quite been accessing as much as we should for green projects. So the Ministry of Finance is pushing to make sure we integrate green projects in everything we do. So these 5 areas I had pointed out to you, we're going to integrate it with climate change because COVID recovery is intertwined with climate change. We can't do one without the other. And we're realizing that as a government.
Right. So that's really interesting to hear because, and it's something where, you know, this crisis is sort of what brought this out. I mean, I imagine some of those projects and the focus on green would not have even come to the conversation if we weren't in the situation we are now.
Precisely.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's changing the kind of the mindset as well, which is
it's changing the thinking. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So just a quick reminder, if you have questions, you can either send the question or raise your hand. But we're gonna take questions and go through your questions from the audience once we're done with this moderated session. So in about 20 minutes or so, we'll start taking questions from the audience. So just keep those in mind. You can be sending them now, and Ogbonna is sending them to me also so that I can share them later with the panelists. So Ahmad, you know, you talked about powering healthcare centers and all that. And the statistic that I heard from your predecessor a few days ago was that only in sub-Saharan Africa, only 28% of health facilities have reliable power, which is pretty shocking, right? Especially when we're in a pandemic and we're in this situation where more than any other time we need health to operate. And if health doesn't have power, it can't operate. But it's the same as so many other sectors. As the Honorable Minister said, people are now working from home, but they're now running their generators 24/7. So we're still, you know, burning fuel, increasing emissions and all that. But we're also seeing, at least from our investees, that people are now calling them and saying, look, in this kind of time, this is when we need solar, because then we don't have to worry about, okay, what if diesel can't be delivered? I still have power. So do you think that this pandemic actually provides an opportunity to increase clean energy in Nigeria, that people, you know, at a household level, at a business level, will have an easier time making that decision than they did before? What's your view on that?
Sorry, Wiba, I think I lost you for the last sentence. Could you repeat the last sentence?
Yeah, so what I was saying is, you know, if you look at healthcare facilities, if you look at households, more and more of them are now looking to solar as a solution in this time because of, you know, needing business continuity and so on. So do you think that this crisis could actually lead to a takeoff of renewable energy, solar energy, etc., across Nigeria?
No, I think I must agree with you that the trend has started to show that within this crisis, you know, unfortunately, you know, the healthcare facilities, as they were on ground, you know, even as we went on some of those interventions, you find that what you have there, even if you have the generators, even if you have the grid, you know, what you find is that they are not reliable enough, you know, especially if some of the equipment we have, you know, we are required to have 24-hour power, you know, reliable, clean power. So what you find is that the trend is actually, is certainly going to change, and is ironic, but perhaps the pandemic, would encourage us to continue powering these healthcare facilities, because what you find, at least, now that you're putting in this power in there, you know that they are within hospitals, they are within treatment centers, and even post-COVID, you have these facilities still there being used by these centers. So for instance, some of the systems that you've put in Weber, you know that even post-COVID, those systems would stand the length of time, especially if you're putting quality equipment like the lithium batteries. So I think in a way, it's ironic. The pandemic has actually gotten us to really, really think on our feet and then start putting these things in place, just so that even after the pandemic, we have actually succeeded in improving the healthcare facilities. So of course, with the residentials as well, part of the programs we run also include the solar home systems, and I'm very happy that the Honorable Minister mentioned this earlier. I think this was a huge policy statement. I don't think the world knew about this, but I think the Honorable Minister, I think I'm glad that I was here when the announcement has been made that this has actually been.
Was it breaking news? Was that breaking news?
It's not. It's actually breaking news.
Wow. Okay. Okay, well, that's great. So thank you for breaking it here, Honorable Minister. This is the right platform.
No, the Minister of Finance had made a statement. Sally J, you were probably not following national news. After each FEC session, we have a briefing of the media. She did make the briefing.
So she did make it. I had insight that it was already approved, so I didn't bother watching to see if it was actually.
Okay, now I've told you the bits contained in the approval. So you are the major one.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
That is good to hear that. So Weaver, this actually does prove what you're saying, that the government is looking towards that direction now, where solar is going to play a big role even for the residentials. And moving on to the solar home systems program that we currently have with the World Bank, there's a platform there, that has been allowing the private sector to come in, deploy this equipment with the residentials, and they've been able to make payments. We've been able to give them a subsidy for those programs. So this essentially takes a very similar way, but then, as the Honorable Minister said, there's going to
Ahmad, you've cut off. At least I can't hear you right now. Okay, can others hear Ahmad? I can't hear him right now. It seems like he's frozen. Okay.
I think
there we go.
For a few moments there.
Yes, yeah. So sorry, you cut off for a bit. If you can start, if you can say again what you were saying.
This certainly shows that that is the direction we're going, and then with the local manufacturing, we are going to further expand this market and bring in local players, bring in the manufacturing, to be able to encourage the private sector to actually begin to produce some of this equipment locally, which will really, really help the market and go as far as electrifying 5 million or so households. I think that's a good one. So thank you for that, Honorable Minister.
Right. Yeah. No. So that's fantastic that this is coming through, and I think the local content part. There are a few companies in Nigeria that are assembling solar panels. There's Attano, there's Blue Camel. There's a company in Enugu called Greenidge Technologies that does inverters. But I think this then is an impetus to say, look, okay, not only do we need solar, but we also need to make this stuff here for our own, power security to some extent. But then also that further reduces the environmental impact, because you're not bringing everything in from China and all those additional emissions that have to that go into all the transports. So I think this is a great example where, again, COVID is leading us to a cleaner future. So Maria, you talked about, you gave Korea as an interesting example, and you talked about, though, that there was all this talk about green recovery and all that in the financial crisis, and that other than Korea and a few other places, it doesn't seem like many countries really took advantage of that and really executed on it. So do you think that this is now the crisis that will force that to happen? I mean, we're seeing it, as what the Honorable Minister said, what Ahmad said. We're seeing it here in Nigeria. Will we see this elsewhere in the world, where this COVID crisis will actually force the hand and make some of this green recovery just law and make it happen instead of just talk?
Yes, it's already being intensively discussed. It's a question more of whether we learned what we had to learn from the last time, and whether there is how to say, enough funds going around right now to in some of the economies to spend on these stimulus packages. But yeah, so well, some of the lessons that were learned at the time were that there are different understandings of what green investments are. It's very it was very difficult to monitor at the time what the investments were, where they were going, what were the impacts in terms of jobs, of GDP. I mean, how do you disaggregate what percentage of your GDP growth has come from a certain investment or another? And then, of course, there was a political, there was a less strong political drive behind it. But I see, we see now, for example, a much stronger understanding among the private sector in the European Union, as certain sectors, for example, emission-intensive industries such as steel or cement, seeing that anyway they're going to have to decarbonize in the midterm. So they might as well be involved in the planning of how these subsidies and incentives are going to be spent, so that it works exactly how they find it should work. And a lot of the negotiations are being driven by major private actors. In the context of Nigeria, I again would say it's a matter of what are the priorities for spending, which I believe shouldn't necessarily be to decarbonize. Of course, the per capita emissions of Nigeria are extremely low. Nigeria contributes 1% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, but there should be a thought to putting Nigeria on the path to low emission economic growth, and also to not lose opportunities from the energy transition that is currently happening globally, and not stay behind from the digital transition and other major trends that where Nigeria should not be left behind, and that have to do with also sustainability, but with a host of other economic goals too.
All right, so thank you very much. So I think you're kind of piling on to what the Honorable Minister said about that. Even though our emissions are low, we need to keep it that way, but we still need to find a way to grow the economy. But let's go back to the Honorable Minister now. And I mean, you already shared some of the details, I think, from the highest levels of government on how the government is responding and how much a focus there is actually on a cleaner return, cleaner recovery. But what other measures are being put in place, or are you recommending, Honorable Minister, that might be able to sustain some of these cleaner habits, I guess that you can say? And the term you used, I think you said the low emissions lifestyle that the lockdown has forced on us. For example, even this meeting, we're doing it online. Nobody jumped on a plane to fly to Abuja. Nobody spent 30 minutes in traffic in Abuja to drive to the site. We're all operating from wherever we are in Nigeria and around the world. Would the Minister of Environment consider recommending to the government, look, all of these meetings that we're always traveling all over the place for, why don't we just hold them on Zoom? We've shown we can do this. What are the kinds of things that in the ministry you are recommending to government to say, look, we've proven we can do this in a low carbon way, so let's continue this? Honorable Minister, can you hear me? Okay, Ogbonna, do you know if she's still on the call? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Okay, Ahmad, are you still on the call?
Sorry, Dr. Boa, she's on the call, but I think she's muted. The honorable minister is muted.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I see.
So how do we get her attention?
She's still speaking, but I mean.
I think admin can try to. Okay.
Okay, it's unmuted now. I found
yeah,
it.
sorry.
I'm
Okay.
still using my phone.
Okay. All right. So if you can start over, because we couldn't hear you.
Okay, I was asking you to speak more on the last part of your question. You were saying something about the ministry.
Yes, I mean, so in addition to what FEC is doing, the Federal Executive Council, what other, what might you be recommending from the ministry for the government, especially to demonstrate for the nation? What are other ways that we can actually come back cleaner? In that, you don't actually need to travel as much as we might have before. We don't have to go all over the place for meetings. What are the kinds of things the ministry might be recommending to the government to consider for a cleaner post-COVID recovery?
Okay, everyone is enjoying the digital way of having meetings, like even the Federal Executive Council meeting is meetings we're having, but we're very social people. So that'll be very, very hard to implement in Nigeria, if I may say the truth. So it's gonna be a very hard recommendation for us to stay this way. We're still working on our policies for reduction of emissions, especially car emissions and trucks. That's a regulatory agency under the ministry. It's finalizing on that for us to start implementing. That's why it's key for us to start off the Interministerial Committee on Climate Change. So every line ministry understands the work of the environment, the issue of climate change actions, and the targets we have. Then get the buy-in. The political will is there, but we need to get the buy-in of everyone and also include the private sector. We policymakers, we can't really implement without having the private sector involved in all we do. So we have to have the private sector involved.
Yeah. So just, I wanted to get this is a bit off topic, but you mentioned, like cabinet meetings right now. So you're all joining from home, just like this?
Yes, we're all.
Are you doing cabinet
yes,
on
we're
Zoom?
all. Yeah, we're doing cabinet. Online, except you have a council memo to present, then you go in to present it. But we all sit in our various offices with the president presiding.
And it works. It's been working.
It works perfectly.
And it's. Wow.
It works perfectly.
Okay. And the governors, I think some of the meetings the governors join, right? Do they join from their states?
The governors forum meeting as well was held with Mr. President online, and it works as well.
Wow. Okay.
So I'm sure by the time we might not need to issue any regulations. People might just get used to it as the new normal and maintain it.
Yeah. And I mean, even if you think of that, every state governor coming to Abuja for a meeting, just the carbon from that is crazy, right?
Precisely.
So they can just stay in their office and the time, and even the time. So that's really interesting. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So and you were mentioning about vehicle emissions as well. Is there anything? I mean, I know we have a power shortage already. Is there any move yet for cleaner transport as well, like electric transport, or are we too far away from that?
No, we're not far away with that. I mean, Nextier has started that conversation, on how we can decrease long-term emissions. We're trying to encourage companies as well. That's why I say private sector is key, to invest in green energy. Then we're talking of a policy as well for the use of what do they call it, two-stroke engines, that are heavy polluters, and encouraging Nigerian transporters to use the four-stroke engine cars, which are much more efficient, Then also Nextier is trying to regulate, implementation is the key. We have the policies, it's trying to regulate the importation of vehicles into Nigeria that don't meet a certain standard like that Euro 3 standards as well.
Okay, so this is all ongoing, and it's not related to COVID. This isn't helping to accelerate it in any way.
It's all ongoing, but COVID is now making us realize the importance of climate actions. Because you know that COVID is intertwined with the environment.
Right.
So researchers have said it's zootonic.
Yeah.
So while we're focusing on clean energy, we also have to focus on preservation of our biodiversity. Conservation measures have to be put in place in Nigeria as well.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much for that. So Ahmad, let's go back to you now. In what ways can access to clean energy accelerate the recovery and growth of the Nigerian economy from the crisis that it's currently going through?
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Weaver. I mean, all we do at the Rural Electrification Agency, we all understand the importance of electricity in the country. You know,
Sorry, Ahmad, you froze a bit.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Okay, I said it's perhaps a common sense that electricity is an essential component of our nation's development process and is the lifeblood of many economic activities in Nigeria. So, I mean, just to quote some stats, according to the World Bank's Africa Infrastructure Country Diagnostic Report, African countries are losing an average of 1% of its GDP per annum due to poor power infrastructure. And that Nigeria's estimated GDP loss from 1999 to 2015 due to underinvestment in power infrastructure is 71 trillion. Furthermore, analysis show that power sector will require funding of up to $1.5 billion annually going forward, which will enable diversification of economy and is estimated to drive growth by at least 29.3 billion annually. So that being said, you know, with some of the programs we are running at the REA, I spoke about, you know, the $550 million project that we have with the World Bank and the Africa Development Bank. The idea of that is that that amount of money is supposed to stimulate up to $2 billion investment in the off-grid sector. With that and what the Honorable Minister just mentioned with the economic sustainability plan, you find that it's very, very critical that putting these programs together would definitely continue to stimulate economic activities in the country. So everything that we're doing, you know, from the solar home systems, from the solar mini grids, from the grid extension projects, you know, it's all geared towards one thing, providing electricity and encouraging people to use that electricity to stimulate their livelihood and to improve their well-being in the rural areas. So I think the two topics are completely intertwined. You know, you can't even talk about the economy without talking about power, because today everything that you do, I mean, power is the essential part of it. You know, you really literally cannot do without power. I mean, even in our homes today, we're not, you know, generators are not enough now. We all have inverters, we have batteries. You know, sometimes I begin to think our kids grow up thinking, you know, if you have some of these things, it's something that is taken for granted, but there are people out there that do not have access to this kind of equipment, you know. So I mean, with the solar home systems, for instance, you know, you can imagine, you know, having somebody that has his solar panel, you know, he's able to charge his phone, he's able to hear what is happening on the radio. that alone on its own is, would impact him and would be able to have knowledge of what is happening in the world. Secondly, with the productive use appliances, we are encouraging that program, and I think we need to continue to encourage this, our mini developers to really key into the productive use appliances of the Africa Development Bank, because I think certainly that would be able to grow the economy.
Yeah. So listen, we have a lot of questions coming in, and a lot of them are actually right on this topic. And so we have a lot of questions coming in, and some of them are right on this topic. So even though I said I wouldn't take questions until later from the audience, I'll just ask you them now. So basically, one question was, we know that climate change has always been an issue. Why is it now? Is there kind of a higher impetus now for green energy? And then the second one is, yes, all of these solar solutions and so on are fantastic, but they're also expensive. So how can the REA and maybe the whole industry help bring the prices down, so that the average household could actually afford some of these solar installations? So could you answer that as well? Those are from the audience.
Okay, thank you, Iba. And I think with having this local production and manufacturing, and you would also know there's a government parastatal called Naseni, who also do local manufacturing in Nigeria, and they are also growing the market. So I think with what you've just asked, just by sheer economies of scale and bringing some of this equipment in, what you find is that once the government is opening up the market, you would find that these things would naturally become cheaper because of the sheer volume that we have within the Nigerian system. So, and also if the private sector takes ownership of it, with the competition you have, with the improvement of technology that you have, you find that the prices would eventually come down. And I think you've even seen the trend now. Some of these equipment that we have now compared to 5 years ago are a lot cheaper. They've been improved by technology. So I think just if the government continues to drive policy towards green energy, that will naturally bring down the prices.
Right. Yeah. And then I think also with the large program that the Honorable Minister mentioned, just those sorts of economies of scale
Yes.
overall helps bring the cost down. So let's move to Maria. Maria, so you did refer to this, but I just wanted to kind of get a few comments more on this. So given the need to quickly resume economic activity post-COVID, post the pandemic crisis, how logical is it to be concerned now about its environmental impact? I mean, we're talking about a cleaner recovery. Does that matter as much as just a recovery? Should we be concerned about the clean part? Maria?
Yes. Yeah. So
okay.
As you will have gathered by now, I don't see sustainability issues as a secondary concern, because at the end of the day, we're talking health, we are talking food security, we are talking employment. And if, for example, we take the issue of the diesel generators, which were mentioned now, there are just as many deaths per year from inhaling toxic fumes from diesel generator use and carbon monoxide than there will be of this pandemic this year in Nigeria. There are long-term health impacts from the generator use in terms of health and respiratory diseases and of increased risk of lung cancer. There are hearing impairments. There is, that's just on the health aspects. Yeah? So I see so-called sustainability aspects they encompass all sorts of considerations about our well-being. And from the perspective of how it intertwines with the economics, the money in people's pockets, again, diesel generators is a perfect example. It's the expenditure. The expenditure on fuel is, as we know, one of the major costs of small and micro enterprise and of large businesses in Nigeria. So again, energy considerations and switching to replacing backup generation with lower emission and more affordable electricity sources is not just an environmental measure. It also happens to contribute to global emission reduction goals. So I see that we should think in terms of the synergies between the two. I don't know if that answers a little bit.
Nope, that does very much so. So let's go back to the Honorable Minister. So as you said at the beginning in your comments, you were expecting a lot of questions and comments about gas flaring, and that is indeed the case. I think about half the questions that are coming in have to do with gas flaring, and obviously that's a huge part of the sort of cleaner recovery is to shut that off. So, Honorable Minister, what the listeners would love to hear. You know, you said that there's progress there. Where are we on that? How many years are we now away from it being completely eradicated? And how can you know, what are the things private sector maybe could also do to help with that? So, Honorable Minister, if you could address that, please.
Okay, I cannot say categorically how many years we have to end it, or exactly when it will end. That will be the Minister of Power that will answer that. As I had said it earlier in my opening, the Interministerial Committee on Climate Change is positioned to tackle this now and make sure that the Minister of Power and Petroleum Resources and the key oil players understand the importance and the gain for us to stop gas flaring. Just like Maria said, it affects the lives of people, the health issues and the health challenges of it. Besides the gas flaring, we have the air pollution issue in Port Harcourt, and this is coming from oil production, but this oil production is illegal refining. So our basket is full of what we have to tackle. So that interministerial committee, when all the line ministries come together, will be able to move forward with it. But categorically, I, as the Minister of State for Environment, cannot give you a categorical statement on that, except the Ministry of Petroleum Resources and Power.
But and this interministerial committee, is this relatively new?
No, it's been in existence, but
it
hasn't quite kicked in under this new, this second term of Mr. President. Since I came in with the other minister in October of last year, it hasn't met. But now with the climate crisis and the COVID-19 issues and the vulnerability of our people, it's now. There's no better time for us to get on it and implement and enforce what we have to enforce for the livelihood of our people.
Absolutely. And there's another question here that actually now is the link between gas flaring and rural power. So maybe you can talk to this a bit, and then Ahmad will talk to this. Is one solution here that then the gas that's flared is instead used for power production, you know, almost like gas powered mini grids? Is that a possible solution for this?
It could be, but I think Ahmad is more of the expert that can speak better to that.
Okay, Ahmad?
Because I know, because LNG, we are considering the option of LNG for clean cooking for our rural women. Yes, clean cooking stoves for our rural women.
Which is also.
And there's some pilot projects. Yes, there's some pilot projects that have taken off on that, but it's for us to upscale that. Okay, so that's one use. I mean, so Ahmad, I mean, can gas flaring then be used? Can the gas there be used for then rural electrification as well? Is that something that REA is also looking at?
Well, currently, I wouldn't say we have started looking at it per se, because as you can imagine, even the solar market, the renewable energy market is just evolving now. You know, so with the technologies that we have now, what you find is that they are just coming into the market now. People are just getting used to them. So with the changing of or converting gas to electricity, you know, is something that we were carrying out researches on, and where we often get proposals on it. We have a department of research and statistics that we tend to look at these sort of proposals. But to be honest, we haven't made any definitive move to start doing that at the moment.
Okay, all right. But I think it's something that maybe it's an opportunity again for environment and REA to come together and look at this.
Yeah, definitely.
But,
it's something we can look into. Yeah, it's something we
Okay.
can look into with REA.
All right. So everyone on this dialogue, we've had, you know, breaking news on things for the solar industry. We have a agreement to work between the ministry and REA. So a lot of good is coming out of this. But I understand that the Honorable Minister now needs to leave. I think she has another meeting now. So how many minutes do we have with you? I mean, could I ask you one more question? Or
okay,
are you
okay.
in a big
You
rush?
may ask one more question. What's the time? 10 after 6.
No,
Yeah. You may ask one more.
You're really enjoying this view, but you need to come back on
No,
this side.
I'm really enjoying the new normal.
No. This, yeah. But I like this. You know, you don't often get this much time with a minister. So I'm taking every advantage we can. But listen. So the question is this. You know, if we're looking obviously at a cleaner recovery, we need renewable energy. We need solar. We need all that. But is the ministry yet looking at, you know, from a longer term, you know, let's say 5 years, 7 years, when the, you know, the lead acid batteries need to be recycled, when eventually lithium batteries need to be recycled, the panels, all the other e-waste involved in solar power. It's not a problem yet because the industry is new, but we need to look at the future, and we need to make sure that, you know, while trying to create a cleaner future, we don't then create a whole other problem. And so is the Ministry of Environment looking at that at all yet?
Oh, definitely. We're looking into that. I mean, the Ministry of Environment, we have 3 regulatory agencies. We have the Nigerian Biosafety Management Agency, which has to do with biosecurity. Then we have the Environmental Regulatory Agency, Nextier. They already have a policy and a regulation to manage lead batteries and electronic waste. And we're also working closely with some private companies that are into recycling of such waste. It's something we are looking at. And we know it's going to increase. Even post-COVID, we're going to have a lot of medical waste.
Correct.
Nigerian is already issuing out the regulations and the guidelines on how to manage medical waste from isolation centers.
All right. So this is all in process. But again, I think that the one on the e-waste from solar, we should really, again, it's an opportunity for all of us to work together and
in the future.
Come up with
definitely we can work on that.
Because even the e-waste itself drives another whole circular economy, right? So it's not just waste.
Precisely. Circular economy is another area that the ministry is looking at in creation of jobs as well. Yes.
Okay. So I think that the number one.
Thank you very much. We have to have this conversation again.
Yes, and I think my biggest takeaway actually from this is that we need us in power. We need to do a lot more and have a lot more dialogue with environment. There's so many overlaps.
Environment, exactly. Yes. Environment encompasses everything: the air you breathe, the land you stand on, the water you drink. Everything is environment. So we should all love the earth and do more for people and planet.
Amen.
Thank you very much.
And we're here to collaborate. So that's fantastic. So thank you again for joining.
Thank you.
We took a lot of your time and we really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right. So Ahmad, maybe let's now let's jump back to you. So on that issue of e-waste, you know, while I guess eventually the regulation will have to come from environment, is that something that REA is looking at yet? And how far are we? Like, is it a year or 2, 3 years away before it becomes a problem, or is it something that's really far down the road?
No. To be honest, I know there has been a lot of effort from the private sector to come up with battery recycling plants. But of course, as you'd imagine, I know the costs are very, very high. I can understand that the Bank of Industry as well are supporting those kind of initiatives. But certainly this is going to be an issue, because with the market growing, what you find is that the batteries obviously are going to be disposed. So if we don't think about it seriously and put out a deliberate policy to be able to curb it early, what you find is that it can become a problem in the future, because eventually these are some of the materials that end up within our waters, the rivers, the lakes, etc. So it's going to do a lot of damage to the environment. But I know we've been having some discussions with the Standard Organization of Nigeria, and in parallel, even some discussions have actually started taking place with the Ministry of Environment. But at the moment, I can't give you a definite timeline, but there has been some discussions now, yes.
Okay, all right, good. And again, it's something that I think as an industry, we all need to come together and play a role in.
Because it could become, it's not a problem immediately now, but it could become a serious issue later in the future.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to Maria. So Maria, you talked about I think sort of the broader global picture, and you gave us an insight in South Korea and how they, using a cleaner economic approach, they weathered storms better and so on. What are some other countries that Nigeria could look to, as the Federal Executive Council, as REA and others are looking for a cleaner development path? What other countries are good examples for that, and what have they done?
So I'm afraid the parallels would need to be looked into oil-rich countries, or very non very diverse export economies, and in those cases, I'm not such an expert of oil governance aspects, but there's experience I've had on countries that are heavily dependent on coal, for example, and their whole economy revolved around coal, and they've had different experiences in moving away. In some cases, it has been a shock, a horrible economic crisis. In other cases, there has been a well managed approach with enough political will, enough engagement of the different parts involved, and a good approach to restoring jobs and sources of income to those affected. I don't know if Nigeria is facing its final act in terms of its oil industry, but there is, I think, lessons to be learned from these transitions in other countries, and perhaps a lot of thinking of what to do currently with the lack of income coming in from the oil sector, and how to spend the little resources that Nigeria will have in the next in the midterm. So yeah, I think you could look at other countries that had to transition away from certain resources and learn lessons of what has worked.
Okay, all right. And then what about countries with who have done a lot to kind of bring in clean renewable energy? I mean, Nigeria has an energy gap of 100 million people. I don't think there's any other country other than India that has even close to that. How can something like that be done in a rapid way, so that, again, we grow the economy, but we don't keep adding generators to it?
For me, I believe the companies like yours and impact investors like you would have looked at this already. But I think if we consider comparable contexts, we need to look at East Africa and how I think from the very top, there's been a drive for deploying small-scale solutions that may not look like the conventional super advanced industrialized solution to the electricity sector, but it actually bring enormous social benefits, allow productive uses, bring about, all sorts of opportunities to those using them, and save them all the money that is being spent on alternatives, which in the case of Nigeria is very heavily, it's diesel generators, definitely. And in those contexts, you can look at what might be needed right now in Nigeria. I always think that actually a lot of the things that are being done in Nigeria are the right steps. If anything, I'd see more need to have more discussion, more resources to decentralize solutions, because I don't think they get to balance. They don't get the same degree of attention as the grid-based part of the power sector.
Okay. Well, we'll pivot back to Ahmad, because I think from our perspective, I think off-grid is now getting a lot more attention. I mean, if you look at the last 2 years compared to what it was 2 years ago to now, and I mean, now there's a threat by TCN employees of that they're going to go on strike, which means there will be no grid, and the entire power will be generated by off-grid solutions. So that means basically Ahmad will be running the power sector for a little while. But listen, from there's a number of questions for you, Ahmad. One is about with all the solar solutions being put in at universities and all these installations all over the country, are the energy emission reductions from that being reported so that Nigeria gets credit for that? Is that being monitored and reported?
I think I know who that question is actually from. A former colleague of mine, probably at the Ministry of Environment.
Okay, they're trying to put you on the spot, I guess. Okay.
As the Honorable Minister rightly mentioned, there exists the interministerial committee on the climate change, where you have one representative of every one of these ministries. So power, agriculture, water resources. And it's interesting, we actually use that same platform to identify some of the projects during the Green Bond process. So we have an understanding with the Climate Change Department. So I know we have had a couple of meetings. We've been given some frameworks that we've filled in and we've submitted to the Climate Change Department. But I don't think that is happening organically. It has happened a couple of times, so we need to pick up that process and own it a bit more. But I guess with some of the halt in our operations now that we're not working fully, maybe that has impeded it a little. But I'll take note of that and be able to run with it a bit more organically.
Okay. So apparently we now have someone. Oh, go ahead. Do you have a response?
Can I speak
also
to that? I think
yes,
the Honorable Minister earlier mentioned the importance of accessing climate finance. So this issue of recording emission reduction from projects is essential, and there are champions in Nigeria that know how to do it, and not all in the electricity sector. There's also in cooking sector, and this is an enormous resource to tap, but it does take a strategic approach from the government. Just to add to that, I think from the perspective of climate finance.
Yeah, thanks for that, Maria. And I think certainly with the, as I mentioned earlier, in the day-to-day projects that we do, with the NEP, perhaps that data hasn't come back to the Ministry of Environment yet, but I'm I'm almost 100% certain with the green bonds and the energizing education program, that data has been relayed back to the ministry, because part of the design of the program did have to, the project had to come up with those emission reductions, ab initio, and they now measured it after the some of the projects have been delivered. So I think moving forward, we'll make an effort to continue down that trajectory.
All right, thank you. So we now have someone in the audience who wants to ask a question, not just type it. So I'm not sure what we need to do, but Ogbonna, can you bring that person on?
Yes, sure. They're going to,
Okay.
Yusuf is going to bring him on right now.
Okay.
There are a number of them. I heard there are about 3 of them. So
okay.
try, yeah, in a few minutes.
All right, they'll have to be quick though. We don't have a lot of time left.
Yes.
Okay, so when you ask the question, please tell us your name, where you work, and then make sure it's a question and not a comment. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, good evening, Weber. My name is Caleb Adebayo. I'm a lawyer with Templars, the energy team of Templars.
Okay.
So my question is this. Is the REA, this is for Ahmad. I had a couple questions for the Honorable Minister, but she's off now. So Ahmad, hi. Is the REA pushing for more incentives for renewable energy? For instance, I note that import of solar parts are still liable to custom duties, and that the industry generally is liable to VAT. Recently, there was the release of a VAT modification order, and natural gas was exempted from VAT. And this is in response to what we're seeing now, the COVID period, and how the industry needs to respond to build the gas space. I think it also needs to respond to build the RE space. So is the REA pushing for the RE space to also be exempted from VAT and to get incentives like exemption of custom duties for importation of solar parts, or in the alternative, enough funding for R&D for local production of these parts indigenously? Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. So very specific question. So maybe Ahmad, you can handle that right away.
Yeah, thank you very much, Caleb. I think this is an issue that is currently on the front burner. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had a meeting with the Renewable Energy Association of Nigeria, and this is something that was mentioned. A few months ago, we also had correspondences from 1 or 2 government officials asking us the same question. So what you find with this, with the import duty, is that because obviously it's not something that, I mean, if I could wake up today and just, be able to take it off, it would have been easy, right? But then you need to collaborate with the right government officials, with the right government agencies, and make a case for this particular policy intervention. So we are working currently with our partners on this to see how we can bring this through. So we've opened up those engagements, and we have made it very clear that solar companies, renewable energy companies do need this incentive to be able to continue to bring in their investment in this sector. So it's definitely something we're doing. We've engaged the Ministry of Finance and the Customs as well to be able to put this through. Well, as you know, it's a policy issue, so it will take a bit of effort to go through, but then we are partnering with stakeholders to be able to take this around.
All right, thank you very much. So I think there's 2 more questions. Let's take them quick, and then we're going to have to round up. Okay, so Ogbonna, can you open the line for the other person, the second person?
Yeah, he's coming in now. Please unmute your mic so you can speak, Mr. Aliyu Abubakar. Okay. Please go ahead. We can hear you, Mr. Aliyu.
Okay, from Aliyu Haidar Abubakar from the Department of Environmental Management, Bayero University, Kano. Well, my question was also on subsidizing the solar. But I think, what do you feel if you can give it as a loan to people so that they can have a payback time of maybe, say, 5 years, and they pay installmentally? I think that will go a long way in solving the issue. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Very concise and to the point. Ahmad, do you have any comment on that?
I think because the question, yes, was very concise, but I think within the context of what he's saying, I think he's talking about private sector being incentivized to go into the space of renewable energy, right? If I'm correct.
Correct, yes.
So Haider, thank you for that question. So sometimes, there are various ways that you can bring in that incentive. It doesn't necessarily have to be a loan upfront, but you can have performance-based grants, as we do with the Nigerian Electrification program, and we found out that also works very, very well, because as you can imagine, the REA, is also getting a grant from the World Bank, to do that particular program. So in a way, it's not an outright loan that you get with that particular one, but then you only get paid, based on the performance that the private developer brings into play. So for instance, we have an example in Niger State where a private sector company, PowerGen, have actually gone ahead to put a mini grid for a community called Rokota, and they have currently now started benefiting from this grant from the World Bank. So there are various iterations of that, but with what the Honorable Minister just mentioned, with the solar home systems, we do have that CBN loan coming through, hopefully very, very soon, where you can have that space that private sector will be able to access that, both for manufacturing and supply of solar home systems.
All right,
also,
thank you very much.
One more, Weber, and there's also the Rural Electrification Fund run by my colleague, Dr. Sanusi Ohiare, who, also provides us with some subsidy and grants within that particular space.
Exactly. Okay. So one more question, please, and then we'll have to round up. So Obana, can you bring the last person in?
Yes, please. Welcome, Anita Nana. Please, can you unmute so we can hear you?
Anita, go ahead, please.
Anita, you're still muted. Your mic is still muted. You might want to unmute so that we can hear you. Okay, I'm not sure what the problem is.
Okay, so I think,
yeah, let's just go ahead, please.
Okay, all right, so we'll go ahead. Okay, so yeah, so I think we've come to the end of our time, and I appreciate the panelists. This has been an hour and a half. So I'll give them each a chance to give about a 2-minute summary of their thoughts on what we've talked about today, and then I'll close it out, and then we can end it. So I guess we should do ladies first. So Maria, can you give your kind of 2-minute summary of your thoughts from this dialogue today?
Great. So just my final thing that I would have loved to discuss more, but I'll just leave it there as another discussion, is how are the entrepreneurs in Nigeria in the renewables and off-grid sector really going to be supported? What are their needs to be able to get to the other side of this crisis? And this is a topic that I've been looking at, and I think it's another interesting issue that could be maybe picked up in another power dialogue. So just to sum up more on the topic of this dialogue, I just wanted to thank you very much to Nextier and to the Nigeria Electricity Hub for choosing this topic, because I think it's extremely important, and we have learned how things are connected and how we should communicate much more between the energy sector and the environment sector. I'm already in that common space, but I realize that doesn't happen as much in our conversations in the energy and in the environment sector. So my 3 closing thoughts are just: environment and economy are not in conflict, and to the contrary, sustainability pays off. But I also wanted to, in fact, reiterate that it's not just that it pays off, we also love the planet, as the Honorable Minister said. And the other thing I want to say is the climate crisis is not going away, and it's the next one. And then I wanted to just reiterate the political moment to decide how to spend recovery funds is right now, and we should not wait, and we should come up with, well, as has been announced today, this is already being decided, but there can be still a lot of engagement with the stakeholders to see what exactly is needed and how these recovery funds should be best spent in Nigeria. And with that, thank you so much for the great
Thank you very much.
Dialogue.
Thank you, Maria. So Ahmad, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Wiba. And I think I would just like to say I really enjoyed my time, the last 1.5 hours here today with the Honorable Minister, Maria, and yourselves. I think it gave us very, very good insight onto what we can achieve when we are under, a lot of pressure. I like to look at things positively. COVID has come. And COVID has been able to put us in a very, very tough situation. But I think, it has made us think outside the box. As you rightly mentioned, something that is really interesting is that, this new norm of having this video conferencing now is something that really, really intrigues me, because even while we weren't on COVID, what I find is that I actually achieve more now during the day, because you tend to have much more meetings, much more relevant, much more intuitive meetings when things are being done from a video conferencing perspective. So I think the longer short of it is that, yes, we're in a pandemic, but we need to lift ourselves up and continue to think outside the box, continue to bring solutions, innovative solutions that would be able to help both the power sector and the environment. And I think today with the Minister of Environment, the nexus was very, very clear, on how the environment is very, very critical to the sustainability of our projects. Each project we do, of course, we go through having the environmental impact assessment for each of those, and then think about the sustainability plan, and how you ensure that if today you're no more maybe the MD of REA, or you're no more the Minister of Environment, how do these projects last the test of time? How do they, how are the institutions, for instance, for the energizing education, how have they taken ownership of these equipment, of these solar panels, of these batteries, of these inverters, to ensure that they are being run for the next 10, 15 years. So I think, in conclusion, the dialogue has just really brought out, what we can achieve if we really put our minds to it.
Absolutely. So thank you for those closing remarks. And I guess, we're now ready to close this completely. And I want to just say a special thanks to Nextier for organizing this, the 46th dialogue, which again means that this has been going on for almost 4 years and continuously, which is a great achievement. And I hope that, in 5 years, we'll be doing the 130th dialogue together. But I think this has been a great conversation. I think, as both of you commented just now, this nexus between environment and power, even though you're from environment before, we haven't been doing this enough. Yes. And I almost heard from the minister that it was like an invitation that we need to talk more. So I think we need to take her up on that.
No, absolutely.
Do that. Yeah.
Environment
and that
was my former home, so
yeah. So don't forget them. They're part of us now, I guess.
Yeah.
And then Maria, thank you for bringing in kind of the global insights. And then I think your sort of focus on the nexus of power and environment, I think, brought a great addition to this. And so we thank you also. So Ahmad, I guess you probably need to break your fast now. Sorry to keep you over.
I cap on for you, actually.
Okay. I know. So sorry to keep you so long.
Notice,
and the advantage of the dialogue like this online is that others who needed to break their fast could do it while we were talking.
Absolutely.
But you are on camera, so we need to release you. So again, Ogbonna and the team from Nextier, thank you very much. This has been fantastic, and thanks for the great questions. Ahmad, Maria, great dialogue, and let's keep in touch.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Weaver.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Thank you.
Boa. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Mr. Salijo. We appreciate the time you've taken to join us this evening, and this was really it was a wonderful session. I'm glad, and we learned a lot. And thank God for the breaking news we got here. We're excited about that as well.
Yes.
Just a few announcements before we close. The next dialogue will be on the 24th of next month. It's
Yeah.
also going to be another interesting discussion, and we'll send out invitations as usual. For this dialogue, we'll send out the communiques, the reports linked to this video, the full recording of this dialogue, so that people who have attended, who have registered, and who joined this meeting on Zoom will get the links and the invitation. Also, I need to apologize to Mr. Sani M. Lawal. He's been raising his hands throughout this meeting for like this time, but because of time, we couldn't get him in, and way conditions went. So please send us your information. Send us whatever contributions you need to make, and we'll publish them where we're releasing all these reports. Finally, those who would want a copy of the communique discussions, please send an email to info@nigeriaelectricity.com. info@nigeriaelectricity.com. Thank you very much again to the minister who has left already, and to everyone else, the panelists left here. I really appreciate this. I'm going to come back personally to say thank you to you. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you,
Bye.
Alonso.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks.